Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you guys with the most up-to-date political, economic, and geostrategic analysis on the world's #2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in.
Okay, happy Wednesday everybody. First up, my apologies over the quality of the audio in yesterday's video. There was a small error made while editing, and for some it may have been very difficult to listen to. I will make sure that I'm aware of this and not repeat the mistake going forward. Let's begin with today's video. Over the weekend, we covered the historic summit between the United States, Japan, and South Korea, where the three agreed to an unprecedented level of cooperation over military and intelligence matters, and a joint statement critical of North Korea and, more importantly, China. See Saturday's video for a deep dive into this development and the positions and statements made by the three sides. First up for today, we will cover Beijing's angry response to this development. This all has serious implications, of course, for the security and foreign policy settings in the region, a region home to the world's second and third largest economies and a growing level of military hardware. Soon after the trilateral meeting, Foreign Ministry spokesperson Wang Wenbin expressed, quote, "China strongly disapproves of and firmly opposes this," end quote, adding that the US should, quote, "stop smearing China's image and harming China's interests, and stop creating division and confrontation and undermining regional peace and stability," end quote. In a state-run Global Times opinion piece, Ding Gang, a senior editor with the People's Daily and a senior fellow with the Chongyang Institute for Financial Studies, wrote that the Camp David summit, quote, "is a significant turning point for China, South Korea, and Japan," end quote, adding it, quote, "shows that Japan and South Korea, following the US, may view China as a significant threat, rival, and potentially an enemy. The division of the region is imminent. The split between China, Japan, and South Korea will harm current economic and trade connections. The split goes beyond geopolitical changes. It impacts the development and future of the world's leading economies. It is a significant turning point for China, South Korea, and Japan," end quote. State media articles with potent anti-American language have flowed in the days since the meeting. One state-run Xinhua commentary, for example, called the US a, quote, "wolf in sheep's clothing," end quote, whose, quote, "evil intent is self-evident," end quote. Sticking to the barnyard imagery, the commentary also says that, quote, "Japan and South Korea will be sacrificial lambs of America's hunger for dominance and be shunned as US lackeys," end quote. Of course, none of the state media articles reflected on the possibility that perhaps the Japanese and Koreans themselves were actively seeking greater cooperation with the US due to their own perceived security concerns in the region. Indeed, Russia's invasion of Ukraine and China's subsequent backing of Moscow sparked robust security debate in both Tokyo and Seoul. In an interview with Korean outlet Yonhap News TV, South Korean Foreign Minister Park Jin stressed that the trilateral gathering, quote, "was not conducted to exclude any particular country or target specific forces," end quote. US President Biden and Prime Minister Kishida made similar statements to their own respective domestic audiences. The South Korean foreign minister continued by expressing that his country wishes to, quote, "foster a mature and healthy relationship with China. As such, a relationship should be built on a foundation of mutual respect and mutual benefit. We intend to maintain a stable relationship with China through communication in the future," end quote. We note, though, in the joint statement between Japan, the Republic of Korea, and the United States, the PRC is criticized by name and accused of, among other things, undermining the rules-based international order, undermining regional peace and prosperity, and acting dangerously and aggressively in the South and East China Seas. Concern over Taiwan, a red line for Beijing, is also raised. While we're here, there are separate Japan-China and US-China developments we need to cover too. For Japan-China, Prime Minister Kishida has said that discharge of the wastewater from the Fukushima nuclear power plant into the ocean will begin from this Thursday, tomorrow. More than 1 million cubic meters of treated radioactive water, enough to fill 500 Olympic-sized swimming pools, will eventually be discharged. China has sought, unsuccessfully, to prevent Japan from doing so and engaged in a months-long international media campaign critical of Japan. This week the Foreign Ministry expressed that Japan did not adequately consult with the international community and called Tokyo, quote, extremely selfish and irresponsible, end quote. Japanese media has hit back, claiming that the levels of radiation in the water are far below the levels of radiation in water China releases into the sea from some of its reactors on a regular basis. Commentators argue that this, combined with the recent Camp David trilateral summit, will likely lead to a set of economic punishments against Japan to be rolled out in the coming weeks and months. And for US-China, yesterday, Tuesday, the Ministry of Commerce announced that, at the invitation of her Chinese counterpart, US Secretary of Commerce Gina Raimondo will travel to China from this Sunday for a 4-day trip to the 30th of August. The trip will involve travel to Beijing and Shanghai to meet with senior Chinese officials and US business leaders, according to the US side. The announcement came just one day after the US Commerce Department's Bureau of Industry and Science said that it was removing 27 Chinese entities from its unverified list after it successfully completed end-use checks. Raimondo's trip comes soon after several other visits from senior US officials, including Secretary of State Antony Blinken, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, and US Climate Czar John Kerry, after years of little interaction between the two sides due to zero COVID. Former US Secretary of State Kissinger also recently made an unofficial visit in the capacity of a private citizen, with the hopes, among other things, to advocate for some greater guardrails in the deteriorating US-China relationship. Next up, the Chinese economy. Hey everyone, if you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to hit that like button. Sharing this with someone who you think would enjoy it on platforms where people like to follow China developments or global developments generally is also a huge help. And for anyone who wants to go the extra mile and help me keep the channel financially sustainable, free and open to all 6 days a week, Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are in the description below. Thank you so much, everybody, for the ongoing support. Next up, we move through several salient economic developments related to the world's number 2 economy. The slow decline of the yuan against the US dollar continues into this week, and JP Morgan Chase, Nomura Holdings Inc., UBS Wealth Management, and others now all predict further weakness in the currency this year. Analysts argue that China is escalating its defense of the currency, quote, pushing up funding costs in the offshore market to squeeze short positions and setting a new record with its stronger-than-expected reference rate for the currency, end quote, in the words of one analyst. Indeed, we remember that the central bank recently set its daily fixing for the yuan at 7.1992 per dollar, far lower than the 7.3103 in a Bloomberg survey, the largest gap since the polls began in 2018. Bloomberg notes that the record positive bias for the fixing came a day after yuan 1-month forward points, a measure of the cost to borrow the currency versus the dollar, jumped the most in offshore trading since 2017. Adding that, quote, China's currency has been under pressure for months as the economy struggles, and People's Bank of China interest rate cuts have widened the yield differential with the US. While China's central bank is easing its monetary policy, it is also trying to slow the yuan's decline with stronger-than-expected fixings, dollar sales by state banks, and measures such as tweaking rules on capital flows. End quote. Meanwhile, Li Bai, founder of Shanghai Banxia Investment Management Center, a top-performing Chinese macro hedge, in an article posted and widely shared on Chinese social media platform WeChat, blamed China's sinking stock prices on, quote, fickle global investors, end quote. In the article, Li argued that foreign funds have stirred up market volatility by selling assets in the market and, quote, taken together, they are a bunch of aimless flies, end quote. The controversial comments come as the Hang Seng Index in Hong Kong and the mainland CSI, China Securities Index 300, both hit new lows in 2023. According to Shenzhen Pai Wang Investment and Management Co., Li's Bansha Macro Fund has been a top-performing multi-asset fund for the past 5 years. While the article has plenty of blame for foreign capitalists, it touches less on why investors were pulling out of the mainland market in the first place, which regular viewers know is primarily linked to uncertainties in the political environment domestically and geopolitical environment internationally, as well as general growing pessimism towards China's economic outlook. And with this point, it is worth perhaps ending today's video by hearing straight from the horse's mouth in this regard. Yesterday, we discussed how several international institutions like banks have reduced their growth forecast for China's economy this year. One of these was US-based UBS Investment Bank, which this week lowered its growth forecast from 5.2% to 4.8%, below Beijing's official target, citing the deepening property downturn, softening external demand, and weaker than expected policy support. Wang Tao, the head of Asia Economics and chief China economist at UBS Investment Bank, published an opinion piece yesterday explaining the bank's thinking behind this downgrade. We end today's video by examining some of the salient points made within. As we move through this, much of the content should be very familiar to regular China Update viewers, as we have been following these developments day by day. We're now quoting Wang directly. We have downgraded China's GDP growth forecast to 4.8% for 2023 and 4.2% for 2024, largely due to a weaker property sector with little additional offset, and as we foresee softer external demand. We also see lower inflation in 2024. We note as an aside that, unlike many developed economies, China is facing the issue of low inflation rather than high inflation. We continue with the quote. Growth has decelerated since April and the property downturn deepened. China's economic recovery waned in the second quarter of 2023 and continued to decelerate into the third quarter after the initial rebound early in the year. Property activities fell sharply after a notable rebound in the first quarter, with new property starts in July running 65% below the average in the second half of 2020 and 15% below the level in the fourth quarter of 2022 on a seasonally adjusted basis, while sales were 42% below the level in 2021 and 4% lower than in fourth quarter 2022. Policy support has been less than expected so far. China's government announced a modest fiscal expansion in the beginning of 2023. However, in practice, the government implemented fiscal tightening to the tune of 1% of GDP in the first half of 2023 in the face of weaker fiscal revenue and land sales. In the face of further declines, the July Politburo meeting sounded a more supportive policy tune on the property sector. However, as of the 18th of August, concrete easing measures have been left to local governments and are modest. In addition, the government also faces structural challenges, including an aging population and restrictions of access to advanced technology abroad, and is supposed to steer the economy away from the property and local government-led growth toward a more sustainable and high-quality one. Here ends the direct quote. Of course, as we have seen again and again and have been reminded from many commentators, this is easier said than done. And a key question we will continue to follow on China Update in the coming months and years is, will they be successful in this transition? Okay, that is today's episode of China Update. Thank you so much everybody for watching. Have a wonderful Wednesday, and I will see you all tomorrow.